there, school counselor. Hey, let me ask you something. When is the last time that you handed a student a worksheet and then walked away going, wow, that made such a huge difference? Now, think about this. You're sitting with a student who struggles with reading. Maybe they struggle with communication or some sensory overload, and you hand them another worksheet. You might be unintentionally shutting the door on the very progress that you're trying to make. But don't worry, you're certainly not the only one. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on why worksheets aren't the miracle tool we've been led to believe, especially when we're working with students who have special needs. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what really works. So let's rethink our toolkits for students and dive into what's truly best practice. Now, before we start, I would love to read a review from Shanice Tet, and she titled her review, The Right Stuff. The review goes on to say this: Steph takes school counseling and makes it relatable, real, and thought-provoking. With an honest assessment of this profession, I have never felt more seen and heard. This, along with the mastermind, has allowed me to become a better counselor and leader to other counselors. Do yourself a favor and listen to this podcast. It was the best decision I made. Shanice, thank you so much for that wonderful review. It means so much to me and to my team, and we're just flabbergasted that people are willing to spend a few minutes to say some kind words about the podcast. If you'd like for me to share your review on the podcast, head on over to your podcast player of choice, whether that's Apple or Spotify. Rate us with 5 shiny gold stars, and then tell us what you think of the podcast. We'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, so back to the topic at hand. You know, we're torn in a million different directions each and every day, right? We're in hyperdrive all day long, and we are working to not only make significant impacts for students, but to reach as many students as we possibly can. And because of that, we are usually looking for things that are quick and things that are effective, right? And worksheets or printables seem to be the perfect solution to that problem because they're neat, they're organized, they're easy to print and hand out. But the uncomfortable truth about these resources is that while they may feel like they're an effective catch-all for the things that you're dealing with throughout your day, those sheets can actually work against you, especially when you're working with some of our most vulnerable students. If we think about a dyslexic student who struggles with text, or a student with autism that struggles to relate to abstract feelings on paper, or an anxious student whose mind just keeps racing and they can't settle down to focus on a written task. These students need more than just a one-size-fits-all approach. And so we're going to look into the details on why those trusty little sheets may be doing more harm than good and causing more work for you in the long run. But here's the great news. Beyond breaking down why these may not be working, we're also going to talk about what does work, the tangible, research-backed strategies that will help you engage your students in more meaningful ways than just on paper. So if you're ready to shake up your school counseling program and you're ready to give individualized support, you want to stick with me here because we are going to get very, very intentional in the conversation. I remember once early in my school counseling career, I was working with a young lady who felt a tremendous sense of responsibility within her family. And she would go above and beyond, out of her way, to take care of things at home that really weren't necessarily her responsibilities. And her parents were sort of baffled by it. The student was feeling stressed and overwhelmed, and we'd really kind of been working on how to address that problem because not only was it present at home, but it had started to trickle in and affect her ability to perform at school. So we had done all of the things that I'd been taught to do in my counseling program, and I was relying on the things that people online were telling me should work, and nothing really seemed to land. It was just like we kept going over the same information day after day, and it really wasn't sinking in. And the student would say, yeah, I understand. I see what you're saying, or, I recognize that. But she wasn't able to change. There was something missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. One day on a whim, I saw an empty backpack in the closet in my office, and I thought, I bet I can use that. So the next time the student came into my office, I said, let's do something different. Here's a stack of sticky notes and a Sharpie, because those students love to write with those Sharpies. Take this Sharpie and write down all of the responsibilities that you feel you should take care of in your day. So she wrote on a stack of sticky notes, and she probably had 8 or 9 really heavy topics on her sticky notes, things that felt like heavy responsibilities for her. So we pulled those out, and I started pulling books off my bookshelf. I wasn't aiming for the big ones. I was just pulling them off, from the end all the way down the line. And I would put a sticky note on the book, and I would say, okay, here's this responsibility, taking care of little brother after school. And I would put it in the back. And then I would take another sticky note. Here's this responsibility. And I would put it in the backpack. And over and over and over again, we put sticky notes on all the books, put them in the backpack. And then I said, hey, so now put it on. Put the backpack on your back and see. And feel the weight of all of these responsibilities that you've chosen for yourself. And she put the backpack on, and it was undeniable the way her face changed. And she looked at me and she said, I've been carrying around a lot. And I said, yes, you sure have. The paper pencil approach, the drawing diagrams was not speaking to her. She needed something different. And I think so often we have students just like that all over our campuses that need something more than a worksheet, but don't know how to tell us that. Paper-based activities have been promoted as very simple, very low prep, and that you can use them for emotional regulation, social skills, problem solving, cognitive behavioral exercises. And they are nice in that they're convenient. It doesn't take a lot of time to print one of those suckers out. And when you don't have a planning period, when you have all of these responsibilities, you can quickly print it out, hand it to the student, and it feels like it's an answer to a prayer when your time is scarce and when you want to engage students and you really want to be structured. I think, too, these paper-based activities have caught a lot of people's attention because it reduces our cognitive load. When we're working through things like conflict resolution or problem solving, those activities outline step-by-step processes, don't they? Identify the problem, brainstorm the solutions, try implementing a solution, and reflect on the possible outcomes. We don't have to work as hard when it's on paper right in front of us. And 2, I will say, I think a lot of school counselors lack the confidence to be able to embark on a lot of different kinds of counseling interventions all in one day, flying by the seat of their pants without any sort of reference materials or resources. That seems to scare the pants off of a lot of school counselors that I talk to. And we need to change that. That's what we're working on doing in our School for School Counselors Mastermind. This conversation is making me think about the feelings worksheets where, you have common emotions on the sheet and you have to circle or color in how you're feeling. I think the idea is to be very straightforward and still give a guided way for expressing themselves when students are struggling to verbalize their thoughts, or perhaps when the counselor is struggling with the idea of open-ended discussion about the topic. And I don't want this to sound belittling, because I don't think that's it. I know that our field is filled with amazing, smart, dynamic school counselors. So please don't take away me saying, well, you don't know enough to do your job without worksheets. That is not my message. My message is, I think we fly so fast, and our industry tells us over and over and over again, get these resources, they'll make your life simpler, that we just kind of buy into it, right? We're too tired to argue. We don't want to have to think and learn and grow after work hours because we're just so spent by 4 or 5 o'clock, right? So this is no shade on anybody, but it is something that we need to be talking about. A lot of these worksheets, too, will claim to be aligned with standards. They'll claim to be aligned with the ASCA National Model, with the ASCA Mindsets and Behaviors. And so if we see that, then we think, oh, okay, so this thing is somewhat vetted, not realizing anybody can say that about anything that they make. All they have to do is find one piece within those expectations and apply that word to the resource and say, yeah, it's aligned with this. I've shared with you before in a past episode that teachers pay teachers resources in the peer-reviewed literature are showing abysmal results. And some of the findings on those resources are downright scary for our students. You can go back and reference episode 114 in your podcast player. It's back in, I believe, at the end of August. The episode was called, Are Yours Legit? The Uncomfortable Truth About School Counseling Resources. So go check that out if you want to be more a part of that conversation. But research tells us, Shelton and Archambault 2019, among others, tell us that usually when they say they're aligned, they really aren't. That these resources are not rigorously tested for effectiveness, particularly when we're talking about working with students in special population contexts. So they may be quick and easy, they may be really cute, but their quality and the appropriateness for the diversity of needs that you see on your campus may not hit the mark. And again, Shelton and Archambault say that these kinds of inconsistencies really raise concerns about long-term educational outcomes. When we rely heavily on these kinds of resources, we can't be assured that we're going to be able to help students make the gains they need to make. And when we think about it that way, we really start to realize that the more of these unvetted, untested resources that we're using in our school counseling program, the more work we may be intentionally creating for ourselves. I have said before, and I will say again, it amazes me, especially in the school counseling world where we are so invested in evidence-based and data, both of which we should be invested in, that we're not publishing those kinds of information on TPT resources. Now, Teachers Pay Teachers doesn't require that, but it doesn't mean nobody can step up and say, hey, I'm going to do this anyway. Let me gather a focus group. Let me get a group of 20 or 30 school counselors. Let me have them deploy this, and let me have them show me their real-time data. And then I can publish that alongside of my resource and really be able to show that it might be worth working with. But y'all, no one's done that. No one's done that. And I get that it's extra work. I get that it's extra time. It sounds like a nightmare to coordinate all that. But at the end of the day, if we don't have some of that boots on the ground action research going on, we literally have nothing to prove the effectiveness of these materials. I think, too, we are drawn to these kinds of things because when we're doing like group counseling or we're doing guidance lessons, it feels efficient for our time in prep and for engaging lots of students at the same time. So that feels good. We feel like we're doing what we should be doing. Now, I will say again, and I feel like I really need to bring this point home. A lot of people have gotten very upset with me in the past when I've talked about TPT resources, about being very careful about the things that we're using. And I have had people tell me things like, how dare you tell me that I can't make good judgments about my materials? How dare you downplay my education and my expertise as a school counselor? And y'all, this is not to do any of those things, but it is to get you thinking more critically about the resources that you're using. If you go online in any of most of the school counseling groups on the planet, you see people talking about printable resources. I don't think a day goes by that I don't get an email from somebody asking me to buy their resource. And no shade there, y'all. No shame in the hustle game at all. But we need to make sure that as we are being deluged with these kinds of messages, that we're intentional about where and how we're using these materials and what we're selecting. Now, this month, we are talking about on the podcast special student populations, how we can better serve them and meet their needs, because next month, that's exactly what we're going to be focusing on every day in our mastermind. We're going to be talking through the ins and outs of special populations, the things that maybe you didn't learn in grad school, and some better, more effective ways to address those populations. Those are typically groups of students that we don't get a lot of experience with before we get out on our own. And they're tied up in lots of legislative mandates, laws, statutes, expectations that we don't understand. And it's this tangled mess of mandates that we're not really sure how to navigate. And so sometimes it's easier just to kind of put our heads down and pretend it's not happening at all, or just to say, man, these kids are just like everybody else. I know how to counsel people. I know how to counsel anybody, so I can counsel them too. And that may very well be true, but a lot of it depends on which resources you're selecting for use. I mentioned at the top of the episode, think about your dyslexic students. If you have a student who struggles with reading and writing, why would we put a paper in front of them that requires them to read and write? We want to reduce their mental and emotional load, not add to it, right? But I've never, ever heard a discussion in the school counseling world about reducing the cognitive load for dyslexic students. Think about students with ADHD. If we're sitting down and having to focus on a structured worksheet, that could very well cause them to disengage, right? Their brains are not wired for that. Or we may be oversimplifying social emotional challenges for our autistic students who tend to see things in black and white anyway. And here we are providing a worksheet that is reinforcing those ideas instead of perhaps getting into some interventions or some activities that expose the student to nuance and how to read and interpret those in their day-to-day life. Raven, Blakely, Smith, and Hepburn, 2015, have a lot of information about using individualized approaches for more effective interventions with students in special populations. And it's true, because those kinds of things can help you account for the unique needs, their abilities, the circumstances of each student, the way they see the world, and truly what they want to accomplish. Shavitz and Shavitz, 2005, found that traditional literacy-based tasks can significantly hinder progress for dyslexic learners. They need some more multi-sensory approaches. They also said heavy reading and writing is going to exacerbate frustration rather than improve emotional regulation. So we're going backwards with this and we're making our jobs harder. Raven, Blakely, Smith, Colleen, Shepburn, and Hepburn in 2012 found that generalized strategies like these generic feelings worksheets, or they cited also social skills group activities, fail to recognize the nuances of students' unique triggers. They also don't recognize the student's developmental stage. Sometimes our special population kids are either above or behind that developmental curve. Hammond, 2015, also asserts that many paper-based activities assume a Eurocentric or a mainstream cultural perspective. So they may not resonate with all students, and the information may not actually be accessible to all students. We can do better through individualized, culturally responsive approaches to improve not only the students' engagement with the material, but also their outcome. And we need to be thinking about this as we are designing interventions. So what do? We have all of this information about the caveats and dangers of using these print and pray activities, especially when we're working with students in special pops. So what do we do instead? Because I imagine you're sitting there thinking, hey, Steph, this is all well and good, but I don't have time to sit down and intentionally design an intervention for every single student that walks in my office. I would never get anything done. I don't have that kind of time on my hands. Well, the good news is, if you are well-versed in some basic categories of interventions, you're going to be just fine. As a matter of fact, you're going to be better than fine because you're going to be able to deploy experiences for kids that are actually going to move the needle. For students who struggle with traditional paper-based activities, maybe we should be looking at some sensory-based intervention. For example, what about sand tray therapy? Students with trauma, students with anxiety, letting them express emotions and work through problems in a non-verbal way. Let them use the symbolism to tell the story. Especially if students struggle to verbalize their thoughts or verbalize their feelings, this is going to be very, very powerful for them. And I can attest personally to this. I worked on a campus once with an extremely high student trauma population. And it made sense because we served 2 large facilities that were foster home facilities. And so students had a lot of unresolved trauma in their lives, and they did struggle to verbalize their thoughts and feelings because for so long, safety was in staying quiet. And we would often go to the sand tray, and it would be amazing, the load that would come off their shoulders when they got done building their tray. Super, super awesome. If you want some more resources, look into some resources such as the ones by Homeyer and Sweeney. Very, very knowledgeable and educated in sand tray therapy. Go get a little bit of training in that just so you kind of have a feel for where you're going, because it's not just playing in the sand. It's not just raking through it. It's not that kind of sensory experience. True sand play therapy activities are completely different. So you're going to want to know what you're doing before you jump in. But that's definitely a wonderful option. What about some art-based techniques? What about allowing students to creatively express themselves through art? Now, you're probably thinking, I do that a lot, but do you really? Crayons and paper, markers and things like that are one thing, but are you truly giving them a different experience? Are you getting out the paint sticks? Do you have the quick sticks in your office? If you don't have a set of those, you need to go to Amazon right now and get some. They are magical. Do you have some watercolors? Do you have some paint markers? Things like that. What can you do to really bring that experience to life above and beyond what they're already doing in the classroom? Or third, what about movement activities? Especially for students who are hyperactive, who have attention issues, or who struggle with some of like the interoception and proprioception. Now, we're not occupational therapists, but we can still provide some of those experiences, and things like learning to manage yoga poses, learning to follow a simple movement sequence can have profound effects for our students. One of the greatest privileges of my life was leading a movement therapy group for students with developmental disabilities. And it was amazing to see what movement did for students in helping them better regulate, not only within the group, but when they were out and about trying to mainstream in public education. The parents would come back all the time and tell me what a significant impact that was having. Look into some of the yoga card decks you can get. They're fun just to practice. You can challenge the kids. How long can you hold this pose? Can you beat me? Or look into some things like brain dance. You can find some videos on YouTube about that, and those are some simple, fun sequences that you can do together. You can turn on some music and really make it an event, but those can be so powerful with the students, so you should try them. And last, maybe some tactile experiences, some sensory boxes, some sand, some textured materials. I once worked with a counselor who had a box of lentils in her office, and students just loved that sensory tactile experience. Can you provide that instead? Can you use those materials in a way that still allow you to have the same kinds of conversations you would have been having through paper and pencil, but without the paper and pencil? Can you modify some of your CBT interventions that are likely on paper into some other modalities? Can you present them through interactive stories, maybe some interactive social stories, maybe using some props or some toys to really immerse students in situations, to really act those out and prepare and rehearse for when they happen in the real world? This is one of my most favorite interventions with students, and I'm sure it's because of my performing arts background, but I just find it so powerful for students. Once they've rehearsed and they have in mind what can happen next or what they can say, it's amazing how much ownership they can take of the next steps. Along the same lines, what about role playing? Maybe you have some props. Maybe you have some puppets or some masks or things like that where you can get really creative but still process the emotional aspects of the situations. What about video self-modeling? What about you role play and you practice the response, and then you let students watch themselves completing that task? It's only going to reinforce their actions and decisions in the rehearsal so that when it comes down to brass tacks, they're ready to go. Or what about some of the therapeutic games you have in your office? Are you leaning on those for the processing value they can bring? So not only just playing Uno as a stress reliever or getting to know you activity, but how can we modify games to really make them work? Playing things like the Ungame with lots of discussion and interaction can be really cool. Mad Dragon is a favorite in my office. It's a lot like Uno, but it gives us the opportunity to talk through coping strategies for anger. Those kinds of things. According to Pels and Kleinert 2016, they're tremendous in helping students self-affirm. And so let's lean on those resources. I bet you already have some in your office, but just think about different ways that you can use the same resources. So I hope that gives you some ideas of some non-paper pencil things that you can try in assisting your students in taking on their challenges at school. When we do this, we need to take care that if we have a student in a special population, particularly if they're in special education or 504, make sure that we're looking at their IEP, make sure that we're aware of the goals. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to work on those if that's not within our scope of responsibilities, but we can reinforce them and we can create activities that align with those specific needs. In the same mindset, you could look at the student's behavior intervention plan, their BIP, to see what skills they seem to be lacking and choose some activities that can reinforce those at the same time that maybe you're reinforcing something else on your end. It's really, really cool when all that starts to sync and work together, and then we start to see some tremendous growth in our kiddos. Also, too, let me mention one more time, just the importance of being culturally responsive and trauma-informed in the activities that we're presenting to students, making sure that we're acknowledging backgrounds and that we're acknowledging experiences of students with special needs who can be marginalized, who can suffer microaggressions in the classroom, right? We need to make sure that we are addressing those as we're building relationships, as we're building skills, and as we are helping them move forward to their best selves. All right, so to recap, critically evaluate your school counseling toolkit. Are your resources and activities predominantly worksheet-based? Are your materials aligned with your students' needs specifically, or are they just convenient one-size-fits-all solutions? And consider your students' engagement levels with your current interventions. Are students actively participating? Are you seeing growth? Or do they seem disengaged and frustrated? Are they feeling hindered due to their unique learning needs? Just ask them, how do you feel about this? Do you like this? Or would you rather do something else? Because I promise they will tell you. Consider some of the alternative approaches we talked through: sensory-based interventions, non-paper-based cognitive behavior approaches, or sensory interventions, some role play and therapeutic game playing. The sky is the limit with this, and once you start to really learn and grow as a practitioner, you're going to discover that you don't need any of these print and pray things. You already have probably everything you need already in your office, ready to go. So I hope by now you're seeing these paper pencil activities in a different way. Whether they've been your go-to or not, we all need to be looking at the bigger picture, specifically for our students in special populations, because I don't think that paper is the game changer that we often think it is. And the good news is you can gradually shift out of that mindset into more meaningful and applicable activities for students so we can support them toward their best outcomes. If you loved this, if this episode resonated with you and you're excited about the possibilities with this, I want to remind you this is the kind of stuff we talk about each and every week in our School for School Counselors Mastermind. We meet weekly for support and consultation. We talk about situations just like this, ideas of things to deploy or approaches to use, and we have our school counseling playbooks inside of the mastermind, which are guides to guide you through these interventions where you can customize and personalize them for the student without having to print any additional materials, go grab a bunch of extra supplies. It's just all right there. It's leaning on your professional expertise and just showing you how to better harness it for phenomenal outcomes. All that and more is waiting for you in the School for School Counselors Mastermind. You can join it by going to schoolforschoolcounselors.com/mastermind. All the information and the sign up button will be right there, and we can't wait to welcome you. All right. Well, this was a powerful episode, and I am so grateful that you stuck with me through the end. I'll be back soon with another episode of the School for School Counselors podcast. In the meantime, I hope you have the best week. Take care of yourself, keep being awesome, and I'll be back with you very soon.